Welcome to Nightveil, where every shadow hides a secret.
A couple of years ago, I went through a rough patch. I went through a separation with my then fiance after an 8-year relationship, and I was moving to South Dakota for a job opportunity. There were a lot of things breaking down at once, and I didn't have much room to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I was crashing at a college buddy's place for a couple of weeks while I was looking for a place of my own. It feels strange to slow down enough to catch a glimpse of your own life. I hadn't taken a vacation in years, and all of a sudden, I had a full month of nothing on my calendar. I took walks, I talked to people that I hadn't seen in years, rediscovered some of the music that I used to listen to. It felt like I was sleepwalking through somebody else's life. But I guess that's what it feels like to breathe free after choking yourself for years. It was a strange time in my life, and it would change me in more ways than one. I used to take walks along the river. I had just started to listen to audiobooks, and I would take the long way back to my buddy's place just to hear more. It's strangely comforting listening to a story. I guess to a lot of people it reminds them of childhood. Having a story read to us is one of the most comfortable things that I can think of. I stopped to tie my shoe when I noticed this acrid smell. I took off my headphones and listened to the river, but there was something else. A weak sort of wheezing, barking noise. Taking a moment to step off the path, I noticed the source, an adolescent deer. It was lying in the river, half its body submerged and the top half weakly patting at the grass, as if hoping that something would pull it up. It was covered in these nickel-sized holes covering the entire side of its ribcage, and I could see something moving under its skin. It was dying, no doubt about it. I stepped a little closer just to see what had happened to it. The poor thing wasn't long for this world. It didn't look sickly, the wounds seemed physical and inflicted. I had never seen a parasite able to do that kind of damage. The barks turned to screams, and the screams turned to nothing. After a while, it was just opening its mouth without making a sound. I could see its eyes searching me. It made me believe in a kind of fear that I couldn't imagine. All these things like losing your job or ending a relationship, it's all very human experiences. But what I saw in that animal's eyes reminded me that there was a kind of fear that I had forgotten, a comfort that I had taken for granted. Something was eating it alive. I stepped back as it took its last breath. There was this chill across my body, like I had seen something that I wasn't supposed to. The shadows around me grew darker. I could feel something creeping across my skin just by looking at this thing. Nickel-sized open wounds, dozens, blood in the water. I walked away with this unsettling sense of dread. I figured that I ought to call someone. You can't have a sick, dead animal polluting the waterways. But more so, I didn't know what to think of it. Should I be horrified, scared, thankful to be alive? I got back to the path and put my headphones back on. I let the goosebumps on my back take over as I shuddered, shaking off whatever worries I carried with me. I raised my phone to put my story back on when I noticed a little gray dot on my thumb. Just this tiny beetle-looking thing. Using my index finger, I flicked it off, but my finger passed straight through it, and the little beetle remained. I shook my hands a little and continued on my way, paying no further attention to it. Apart from that, it was a fairly uneventful day. I had a chicken salad, answered some emails, and looked into some apartments. I had a good lead on one. I just needed a little more time. Luckily, time was the one thing that I had plenty of. I have very patient friends. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I remember standing in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. Maybe my eyes were looking a little darker and the skin a little loose along the cheeks. They say you never look at the same you twice. Age does that to a person. As I leaned down to spit, I felt a tickle on my right hand. Not much, but enough to make me look up. There was that little gray beetle crawling across the palm of my hand. I turned the faucet to medium and ran my hands under it. The beetle was still there. I turned my hand back and forth, up and down, and it didn't move an inch. After a couple of seconds, I was blasting it at max temperature, and the water passed straight through it. I could see the beetle with my own eyes, but it was like it wasn't really there. I put it out of my mind. I still had a story to listen to. I was going to go look at that apartment in the morning. I had things to do, places to be. I couldn't let my mind get preoccupied with little things that didn't matter. I had real problems looming on the horizon, and if I kept staring at my hands, I'd get nowhere. And so I went to sleep, trying not to pay attention to what I think was a faint tingle on the palm of my right hand. I had forgotten all about it the next morning. As I showered and shaved, I noticed a streak of blood across my cheek. Not much, and just a tiny red line. I figured I had accidentally cut myself, but on closer inspection, there was nothing like that. It had been a perfect shave. And then I looked down at my hand. It was just a tiny little red dot on the back of my thumb, no bigger than the prick of a needle. The tiniest little trickle of blood was running out, but it was already coagulating. And at the edge of the wound, a little gray beetle, suckling at it like a gazelle at a watering hole. Now, I've never really had a problem with bugs. I ate a worm as a kid, but that thing was messing with me. I washed my hands 3 times and it was still there. I used more and more soap. I used a sponge and I scrubbed until my skin felt raw. I used dish soap, a weird skin cream that I found by the tub, but it did nothing. The beetle was still there, poking at the wound. Finally, I just put a band-aid over the whole thing. It took the beetle a while to figure it out. It tried to dig underneath, but the adhesive from the band-aid was blocking it. With enough effort, it probably could have made it through, but it had an obvious solution to this problem. It moved out of the way, and it bit me. Now there was another little wound, barely big enough to be seen, but it was there. I figured it just wasn't real. It wasn't reacting to anything, so it couldn't be real. Real things get washed off. Real things get scrubbed. Real beetles get squished and washed down the drain. Real things show up on the screen when you take pictures of it. This didn't. Ergo, this thing couldn't be real. I mean, it wasn't possible. Deciding that this was the case, I made myself ready. I put on my nice shirt and pants, got my car keys, and I checked the calendar. There was nothing tickling the back of my hand, nothing biting me. I had real problems, and this wasn't it. For a couple of hours, I felt nothing. I went around town, checked out an apartment, and had a long talk with my would-be boss about my upcoming move. He was flexible and could give me a couple more weeks, as long as I kept in touch and let him know the second that I was available. The whole thing was a done deal, but it's always a bit nerve-wracking when there are papers left to sign. I went to see a guy about an apartment later that day. I got there in my fancy shirt trying to look the part of a confident buyer. I shook his hand and noticed him looking down. There was blood on his finger. He had accidentally touched one of my wounds. He looked up at me with this one expression of absolute disgust, like I had spat in his face. He composed himself in the blink of an eye, but for a moment, I could see what he was really thinking. I apologized profusely, and he did as well, but I could tell that it really bothered him. All of a sudden, he wasn't thinking about the apartment. He was thinking whether he had caught something from me or not. He jogged inside to wash his hands, and I knew the whole deal was going to free fall through the floor. There was just no way. I don't think you'd be shocked to hear that I didn't get that apartment. And when I got back in my car, I was furious. I could see the beetle on the back of my hand circling a little pinprick of a wound. I smacked my hand on the dashboard over and over and over, but once I turned my hand back, the beetle was still there. I brought the hand to my teeth and I bit my skin. I spat and scratched and itched, but still nothing. At my worst, I was using my car keys to scratch my skin like a lottery ticket. But all that did was make it worse. The beetle didn't seem to mind that. It was an enormous source of frustration. Not only was it bothering me, but it was impacting my actual life. My buddy was asking questions about my apartment hunting, and it just got to me. We ended up agreeing that I could stay the full week, and then I would go stay at a motel. It all sounded very cordial, but I could tell that he was just done with me. That's how a lot of things in my life ended, with cordial smiles, tilted heads, and practiced lines. My relationship had died the same way. No screaming or crying, just a well-timed, we need to talk in a public place as to not cause a scene. But this beetle was driving me mad. I couldn't take photos of it, and so I tried to draw it. I tried to get a better look using a magnifying glass, but I'm a terrible artist. Still, I got a good enough look that I could recognize it from a photo. I scrolled through hours of images looking to see if I could find that one particular beetle. I never found a perfect match, but I think the closest description would be a sort of stubby darkling beetle with a light gray exoskeleton and short legs. All the while, it was chewing away on the back of my hand, and I could feel every tickle of its legs as it moved from one wound to another, poking at the scabs. Going to bed that night, I could feel the heat from my hand, not from the beetle but from the way that I had scratched and itched at it. It looked swollen even from a distance. I probably had to get it checked out if it progressed. But that line of thinking drew me down a path that I didn't like. Laying down to sleep, I could still see the eyes of that deer. Those blank, dark spheres looking not at me, but at the concept of me. Not knowing if I was a savior or a predator. Maybe it figured out that I was neither. Maybe those barking noises were a warning to stay away, to turn around and run. I never really fell asleep, but I shot out of bed like I'd been kicked. I felt a bite, this time further at my wrist. Turning on the lights, I could see that the beetle had grown larger. Not by much, but maybe 1/6 of an inch. There was a slightly bigger bite further up on my hand. It itched, already turning red. I was done with this thing. I was absolutely, unequivocally done. I would kill it, even if it meant chopping my own hand off. I had had enough. I pulled out some ice from the freezer and I dumped it in a bucket. I filled it with water. As I did, my friend walked out of his bedroom, hair still messy and a sleep mask tucked away on his brow. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm almost done." "Okay, but what are you doing?" I sighed and bit my lip. There was no way of getting around it. I was going to have to look like a madman. I turned to him and I showed him my hand. "You see this?" "Yeah? What do you see?" He looked a little closer. There was no way that he couldn't see the beetle. The thing was front and center. It looks like a rash. You okay?" "It's not a rash, it's not a scratch. I don't know what the hell it is." "Yeah, you should get that checked out." I rolled my eyes as he lumbered back to his bedroom. I shoved my hand down the icy bucket, only to watch the beetle casually travel up my arm, find a warm spot, and then bite down again. This time I felt it. Over the next few days, the beetle was always on my mind. Everything else became this background noise to this immediate thing that I could see on the back of my hand. I would get these specks of blood on my shirt right by the wrist, and I would absolutely lose my mind with anger. At one point I noticed it didn't seem to bite at wounds that were covered in something, so I rolled my entire hand in duct tape. The dang thing just crawled up my arm, found another spot, and then bit me again. I tried everything. I bought pesticides from a garden shop. I used some stuff that was used to clean pools. I tried to cut off the blood flow with a belt, but it didn't work. No matter what, the beetle had a solution. It would walk somewhere else, bite down, and keep eating. After a couple of days, it was big enough to cover the nail on my pinky finger. The same day, I moved out of my friend's place and into a motel. I went to see a doctor. I didn't even bother telling him about the beetle. I just showed him the wounds on my arm. He ended up giving me a prescription for some kind of eczema medication and encouraged me to eat more fiber, but there was little else that he could do. All test results came back negative. He recommended some generic antifungal cream, but I would have to wait until the wound scabbed up. I would get these bouts of rage and I'd be going along normally and then feel that twitch of pain and I would lose my mind. I would slam my hand against the wall or beat my arm like a drum. I ended up only making it worse and I was nowhere near closer to getting rid of that thing. It would keep me up at night. I could feel it crawling around looking for places where the skin was soft and thin. And this one time as it bit down into the pit of my elbow, I made this ugly grunting noise. My mind circled back to the ugly grunting of that dying deer. Perhaps it too had looked for a solution. Maybe until that last moment, it had tried to wash them off by throwing itself in the river. Was that going to be my fate? Dying of some self-inflicted nonsense while this thing ate me from the inside. It was hard to stay focused. I was barely getting more than 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night, and I found myself nodding off in my car. I moved into a motel down by the highway, but the Wi-Fi was spotty and I had trouble finding a new place to live. I could spend hours at the computer and still be no closer to a solution. All the while, my savings were bleeding out, and my would-be boss was asking questions that I couldn't answer. I had this one constant tab open where every now and then, I would look into whatever long shot I could imagine to get this thing off me. Poison, radiation, x-rays, sound waves. There were a lot of ideas. The problem was, without knowing exactly what it was, there was no way to say that what would work and what wouldn't. But I couldn't show it to anyone, and describing it just made it sound like a sort of gray beetle. And then I had an idea. It was nasty, but it just might work. I had this cigar cutter from a friend's wedding the year prior. I hadn't thrown it away, but never really found a use for it either. I'm not much of a cigar guy, but it's kinda cool to keep something that looks like a guillotine in my pocket. I noticed that if I poked myself, I could sometimes get the beetle to move. It would always go towards the freshest wound. So little by little, I tricked it to go to the tippy top of my ring finger. I set the skin at the tip of my finger at the edge of the cigar cutter and I slammed down. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. It burned, but we're talking about a small patch of skin at the tip of my finger. The beetle tumbled off, rolling onto the floor. I backed away, holding my finger up triumphantly. And then it flew towards me. Turns out this thing had wings. I tried to smack it away, but it passed through my hand. I tried running, but it passed through the door. I got in my car and drove, and it slowly came crawling from the dashboard right back onto my hand, still bleeding from the top of my finger. As it bit a nerve, I pulled over. I was in the middle of nowhere by then, and I just stood there screaming for a solid minute. My voice, it must have echoed for miles. I drove around going numb from the pain. If all this effort was all I could do to slow it down a little, I was going to wear myself out. There had to be something else that I could do, anything. I experimented with a couple of things for a few days, changing my diet for one. I figured if this thing lived off of me, maybe changing what I ate could kill it. I tried a bunch of weird combinations, but nothing seemed to work. If anything, eating more fiber like the doctor had ordered seemed to make it more active. A couple of days passed and the beetle was growing. It could easily cover the nail of my ring finger, and I could feel the individual legs and the round mouth moving in and out as it bore into my flesh. The wounds had started to look like what I had seen on that deer, round and cavernous. And when you don't sleep and the days start to blend together, I would forget to answer emails and phone calls. Instead, I would just sit in my motel room hoping that housekeeping would come by to change the bloodstained sheets. I had begun wrapping my arm in a towel at night, but the wounds were getting big enough for the blood to soak right through. I was tired, exhausted really, and it was starting to show. Looking in the mirror really felt like looking at a different person. I stopped answering when my would-be boss called. I stopped asking when friends and family called. When I started getting texts, I just shut the phone off completely. They weren't helping and they wouldn't understand. I mean, how could they? I tried to get a video of the beetle biting me so that you could see the wounds opening. It took a few hours, but I got it eventually. It looked sort of weird, but not like a bite in the video. It looked more like the skin was just contracting and releasing, less like a bite and more like I took a deep breath and something broke on the exhale. It didn't really show anything. I considered getting a microscope or some kind of macro lens, but what was the point? I tried everything: electricity, pepper spray, fire, acid. I considered that maybe I could cut my finger off high enough in the air, but the dang thing could fly, and it was fast too. It wouldn't work. I made a long list of possible ideas, and one by one I crossed them all off. All the while I would feel something stinging my arm, and this ceaseless frustration would well up in my chest with nowhere to go. The truth of the matter was, this thing wasn't leaving. It was going to eat and grow and eat and grow. It didn't matter what I did, and it wouldn't matter what I tried. I made list after list after list, and it was all just a monumental dead end. As I panicked and cried and scratched, it just sat there, quietly eating away at my skin. People must have thought that I had been in an accident. Some of the wounds had gotten bad enough that I needed bandages. The guy at the drugstore started to recognize me. I remember booting up my phone to check a video that I had made, only to get caught in a call with my would-be boss. I had about a dozen missed calls from him by then, and on a whim I answered. "Hey," he said. "Glad to reach you. We were getting worried." "Yeah, sorry," I said, my voice hoarse. "I've come down with something bad." "You're sick?" "Yeah, it's been pretty bad." I held my hand up, watching the beetle scurry over the bandages looking for its next spot. "Oh, we've been waiting to hear from you. We weren't sure you'd be coming." "I'm not so sure either." "Sorry?" It had just slipped out, but I couldn't help myself. The beetle bit down, sending another jolt of pain up my arm. I shuddered. It was as big as the nail on my thumb by now. Not that it mattered. It was a pain when it was small. It was going to be a pain when it grew bigger. "I've been dealing with something," I said. "I don't think that I'm getting better anytime soon." "Oh, it's that serious?" "I don't know, maybe." The beetle suckled at the wound, perching its legs and the sides for balance. Not that shaking it off was ever an option. "You don't know if it's serious?" "Oh, I suppose it is." I yawned. I couldn't help it. I was exhausted. I turned my hand back and forth, watching the beetle hang on like it was nothing. "I'm gonna be real," he said. "We were expecting you days ago. This doesn't look good." "I might be dying." "You might be. How can you not know?" "I don't know. It's been eating me for weeks." I was referring to the situation as a whole, but looking at the beetle, I realized it was astoundingly literal. Eating me for weeks, it wasn't meant to be a pun. But the moment I realized it was, I burst into a laugh. This loud, belly-bursting, manic laughter. I don't know at what point my would-be boss hung up, but I didn't care. I was laughing until I ran out of breath and the tears rained down my cheeks. The laughter turned to a wailing cry as I rolled around on the floor like a toddler. I ended up lying there for hours, watching the beetle take one bite after another after another. It was sort of hypnotic, and after a while you disassociate enough to not feel the pain. That's not your hand you're looking at. It's his. After that point, I didn't really care anymore. I stayed in my motel room watching the beetle wander up and down my arm looking for weak spots. It was sort of beautiful in the bright light. Not really light gray, but more of a pale asphalt blue. Sort of like the novelty sunflowers they sold at the garden shop. I would lounge around waiting for a genius idea to spring to mind. I would keep my headphones on and walk for miles, forgetting to put on something to listen to. I just didn't want to hear my own grunts of pain when the beetle bit me. It had stopped growing bigger, instead now growing longer, segmented. It was almost as big as my thumb. I didn't care, but the bites were getting harder to ignore. I got into this daily routine of cleaning my wounds, taking iron supplements, and covering my body in bulky clothes. Thankfully, the motel room was cheap. At night, in lieu of sleeping, I would bounce between impotent rage and desperate crying. I would feel so sorry for myself, listing all the things that I wanted to do if I could get this thing off of me. All the while, it would just bite, chew, swallow, and repeat. Lying on the floor, I remember waking up from a strange rhythmic sound. I couldn't figure out where it came from. I turned on the lights and realized that I was shaking. The sound had been coming from me tapping the floor. I rushed to the bathroom. My mind was racing 100 ways at once, but they all funneled into this one contracting idea. I was dying. I saw my black eyes in the bathroom mirror, and it was like staring that deer in the face all over again. It had known that it was dying, and now I knew too. The pain got progressively worse. I started getting these big, round wounds just inches apart. Some bigger, some smaller, and some with long strips of skin missing at the edge. If I tried to cover the beetle with my left hand, it had grown big enough that I could see the tip of it peeking out the back of my hand. It looked so physical, but everything still passed straight through it. I hadn't even realized that I had given up. It just dawned on me that I had no ideas and nowhere left to go. I could go back to the doctor and get my wounds treated, but would it matter? Sooner or later there'd be too many. I could prolong it, but to what end? Would I grow desperate enough to throw myself into a river too? I started listening to my audiobook again. I walked around for so long that I forgot how many hours had passed. I wouldn't even notice the shivers coming and going. It was just nice to finish something. At the end of one of those walks, I remember sitting down on a park bench. At this point, I could feel every bite of the beetle. It was so frequent that it looked like I had the hiccups, sending my entire body into a spasm. I put on my headphones and dialed a number that I hadn't touched for some time, my ex-fiancée. We hadn't talked for weeks, and despite promising to be friends after an emotional breakup, it didn't take her long to pick up. She waited for me to speak first. Hey.
Hey you doing okay?
Not bad, you. I looked down at my hand, watching the segmented creature scuttle around, finding the perfect angle to eat. I know we've talked about this, I said, ignoring the question. Why did we go this way?
What do you mean?
It was 8 years.
We weren't getting anywhere with your job and my classes we keep, I don't know, circling the same drain. Year in and year out.
I nodded. I had heard the same argument and even felt the same thing. It just seemed like a really long time ago. Is that such a big deal though? Jobs, classes, yeah, it matters, but for how long?
Until I retire.
Oh, that's a long way off.
Yeah, but that's coming too. Jobs end, classes end. But we could still be around.
She paused for a moment, letting out a sigh.
I don't think we can.
I nodded and we sat there for a moment, letting the silence stretch the distance between us a little further. I gave up after that point. I bought a whole bunch of gooseberries and just sat in the motel room eating them like it was a job. They're rich in fiber and one of my favorite berries. Given the way this thing has reacted to me eating more fiber, I figured I might as well make a good meal. I was coming to the realization that I wasn't going to be okay. My arm looked like a minefield and a couple of wounds were all the way down my shoulder blade. The thing scurried so fast from one point to another that I had trouble keeping track. If it wanted a particular spot, it would sometimes flutter from one point to another in a soundless burst of clattering wings. The fibers really kicked things into high gear. The thing got ravenous. I thought it was just a strange quirk at first, but it completely changed the way that it behaved. It stopped taking the occasional bite and started digging down in a frenzy, not moving from one spot to another, but instead focusing on this one particular hole in my shoulder, straight through nerve and tissue and muscle, to the point where the pain was so bad that I couldn't focus. I ended up on the floor of my motel room screaming and bleeding all over the carpet. The pain had been manageable when it was just the occasional bite, but now it wasn't stopping. It was eating and growing so fast that I could physically see it. Someone called the cops. I have this vague memory of a door opening and somebody screaming at me. Meanwhile, I'm seeing this creature the size of my hand scurrying back and forth over me, biting down and tossing its body around like a predatory death roll. Somebody was shouting, "We need an ambulance!" The creature was literally foaming at the mouth, some kind of anticoagulant. My wounds weren't closing. I could feel this strange cold enter my bloodstream. Colors looked different, sharper sort of. The pain slipped from me, not like an anesthetic, but more like I just forgot what pain was supposed to feel like. It left me feeling empty and callous, like there was nothing left that could touch me. The only problem was I couldn't move. Somebody put on gloves and dragged me out. Somebody else was trying to cover my wounds in bandages and gauze. There were flashing lights and raised voices. Meanwhile, this thing was taking bites out of me in front of my eyes, tearing up the skin for all to see. There was this one policeman trying to drag me out that dropped me the moment that he saw a new wound burst open. I can't imagine what he must have thought I had. Meanwhile, I was nodding in and out of consciousness. Voices started to sound different. The sky looked strange. I was splayed out on a gurney and it felt like I was already dead. And during the ambulance ride, the creature had settled on my stomach, tearing holes out of me. It curled up like a lapdog, not large enough to cover my entire arm. It wouldn't stop eating. The bites felt like nothing but distant pinches, but I saw the volume of meat disappearing into its maw. I looked one of the paramedics in the eye and realized that I was making a sound. With every bite, I was making this reactionary noise like a bark. I must have looked at them the same way that deer looked at me by the river. For the first time in a long time, I could see something of myself in another. More so than by looking in the river, we were both scared to death. I tried to speak, but the words didn't come out right. I tried to breathe, but the signals didn't reach my lungs. I was collapsing, shutting down. Little lights in the palace of my mind going out, one by one, as bite after bite took away some semblance of self. I was dying and I could barely feel it, but a part of you just knows. I don't know where my conscious thoughts ended and something else began, but I remember swirling colors and strange voices, bright lights passing by, maybe street lights, a sky with strange moons and people talking in unusual languages. Somewhere in the haze of expressions, little undercurrents of things that I never got to experience, things that I don't know I missed. Eating ice cream, having a fragrant bath. And then one bite struck a nerve on my neck and I passed out. There were little flashes of life here and there, like a light swinging back and forth in my mind. In one moment, I'm being rolled into the emergency room, and then somebody's holding up my hand and looking for a pulse. And that thing, the beetle, curled up on my lap in a spiral. Had it stopped eating? The next time I opened my eyes, it was dark. There were machines and wires and cables. The thing resting on my stomach looked different. It had curled into a ball, the head and tail sort of fused together. It was lying still, slowly bobbing up and down with the rhythm of my shallow breathing. No pain, no biting. I lay there looking up into the ceiling. The colors had faded. There was this tingle in my eyes that if I looked a little closer, I could almost see the stars in the ceiling. Maybe it was just random neurons firing randomly to keep my senses alive, but to me it just looked like silver sparkles. I was glad to see them dance. It felt like the blink of an eye, but then it was morning. People walking in and out to check on me. Somebody had opened the blinds on the window. The creature looked different as a light blue mold had crept over it, and then it cracked open. I saw movement, little things making their way out of the creature that had been eating me, breaking it apart like a cocoon. At first, it looked like some sort of mantis, until I noticed the wings. They unfurled, stretching out one by one and testing their tensile strength. There were about 7 of them in total, just these little red, white, and black things covered in gray hairs. Butterflies. They didn't stay long. They polished themselves off and took to the sky, passing straight through the window pane and into the world beyond. In the days to come, the doctors looked for answers. Somebody thought that I had gotten the flesh-eating bacterium, but it didn't follow any known symptoms. Once it was clear that whatever it was that had gotten flushed out of my system, they focused on my recovery instead. I think in a strange way, giving up had accidentally saved me. If I hadn't started eating more fiber, that thing would have killed me from just the wounds, but accelerating the process, it got what it needed before it killed me. And by the time that I left the hospital, I had a journal full of question marks and a body full of scars. I was scheduled for a follow-up, but it was just to check on the wounds. There was nothing that they could do to make sure that this whole thing didn't happen again, because they had no idea what it was to begin with. Looking back at it now, I feel like I should be angry, like I should be cursing God for making something that I can't understand, that tormented me in such a cruel way. I know that I should feel like that, but at the end of the day, I'm just happy to be here. I can acknowledge that shitty things happen, and still be thankful that I get to enjoy the things that I've taken for granted. It's helped me look past the calls and the emails and the diplomas. There were other jobs out there and other loves. I can't say my life is perfect today, but it didn't end with one turbulent upheaval. Not from a move or a breakup or a beetle. Life goes on, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes on my way home, I take the long route. I put on an audiobook, and if I look closely into the distant fields, I can see something fluttering from one bush to the other, biting into meaty red berries and suckling the juice. Little gray butterflies with red, white, and black wings that only I can see.